We got the lights right here and shit.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Jule Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art at Auburn University.
I'm Imani Poole, a second year majoring in mathematics.
I'm Josh Herring, a senior in English creative writing.
And we are both members of the Education, Engagement, and Learning team here at the Jule.
Tonight, it is our distinct pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 Auburn Witness Poetry Prize.
Our event tonight is being live streamed, and we want to thank you for joining us, whether from the comforts of home or in person. If you are here in person, please remember to silence your cell phones.
And now to introduce this evening's program, please join me in welcoming Cindy Malenik, Executive Director of the Jule.
Right up here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Josh and Imani. It's wonderful to see everyone here. It's my pleasure to welcome you all this evening to the Auburn Witness Prize honoring Jake Adam York. This is a valued and long-standing collaboration with the Department of English and the Southern Humanities Review. To begin, I'd first like to acknowledge the history and stewardship of the original homelands and territory of the Creek Indigenous peoples, on which Auburn University is located. Descended from the mound builders of the Mississippi River Valley, they lived here raising their families and farming until forcibly removed during the Trail of Tears. A clan of these people, the Porch Band, remain to the south of us, and no doubt their enduring legacy and relationship with this place continues. I call forth the Creek because it's important for us to always consider our place within this longstanding history. We're delighted that the Witness Prize will feature again an object from the museum's collection on its cover. Our colleagues this year selected Darker Sister, a 1944 print by Doris Alexander Thompson. The image reproduced is a lithograph from the Imprinting the South collection, established at the museum by Dr. Lynn Barstis Williams Katz. Born in Mobile, Alabama, Alexander Thompson was part of a robust cadre of Southern printmakers, female printmakers in the early 20th century. She also owned and ran her own press throughout her career, a novelty for a woman at the time. Darker Sister is one of Alexander Thompson's earliest lithographs, and as the title implies, it evokes a sense of female kinship between a white artist and a Black subject, despite the sanctioned violence and segregation of the Jim Crow era. The work was selected for the cover alongside the work of 2022 Witness Prize winner Daniel Donaghy, whose winning poem, Tulsa Triptych, in the words of poet Rick Barrett, takes a neglected piece of the American story and brings it into the light of the present. We're delighted that both Rick and Daniel are with us tonight. I extend my deepest appreciation as well to the organizing partners for tonight, the entire museum staff, for this important work and this engagement. I'm also grateful to our museum donors who make all of these engagements possible, and certainly the leadership in the Office of the Provost, including Dr. Vinnie Nathan, who's the interim provost. And so now please join me in welcoming Emma Brousseau, the managing editor of the Southern Humanities Review. Emma.
Hello, my name is Emma Brousseau, and I'm the managing editor of Southern Humanities Review. As Auburn University's literary magazine, Southern Humanities Review has had a long tradition of publishing poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. Since 1967, we have been engaging not just with the Southern literary world, but with the national and international literary world. We started the Auburn Witness Poetry Prize in 2014 as a way to honor Jake Adam York an award-winning, celebrated Alabama poet and alumnus of Auburn University. His poetry examined race relations in the American South, uplifted the civil rights movement, and interrogated his own privilege and complicity in racist institutions. York was a poet taken too early at the age of 40 due to a stroke. However, his impact on the literary world was significant. A teacher and an author of 5 books, York was also an editor. He founded the journal Copper Nickel in 2002 and acted as a contributing editor for magazines like Shenandoah, Story South, and the Kenyon Review. The Auburn Witness Poetry Prize honors York and paves the way for fellow poets whose work resonates deeply to enrich the mind and stir the heart as part of Southern Humanities Review's mission statement. Now, in the prize's 9th year, we hope it will achieve more in honor of York's memory. We hope it will pay poets for their creative labor because we believe this work has value and deserves compensation. We hope it will shed light on the resilience of humanity in the face of strife. We hope it will put emerging writers into conversation with well-established writers. And we hope it will interrogate the systems and institutions that continue to disenfranchise historically ignored voices. This year, we are thrilled to publish the winner and finalists of our prize. Poets like Jubia Arola Headley, M. Cynthia Chung, Julia Kolchinsky-Dasbach, Marissa Davis, Emma Dazelle, Jacob Griffin Hall, Cindy Gianoke, Desiree Santana, and Alexandra Teague, as well as our winner, Daniel Donaghy, whose award-winning poem you'll hear momentarily. Together, these poets address climate change, the effects of war, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, suppressed history, and guns in America through their work. It is not only our privilege to share these poems with our readers, but our responsibility. I want to thank everyone who makes this prize possible, but I want to especially thank the poets who trust Southern Humanities Review with their words, without whom this prize would not exist. Thanks to all, and let me bring back to the stage Josh Herring to introduce the first of our poets for tonight.
Thank you, Emma. Poet Rick Barot was born in the Philippines and grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. He attended Wesleyan University and the Writers' Workshop at the University of Iowa. Barot is the author of 4 books of poetry: The Darker Fall, Want, Chord, and most recently, The Galleons. The Galleons is listed as one of the top 10 poetry books for 2020 by the New York Public Library, a finalist for the Pacific Northwest Book Awards, and received recognition on the long list for the National Book Award. Barot currently lives in Tacoma, Washington, and directs the Rainier Writing Workshop and the low residency MFA program in creative writing at Pacific Lutheran University. Monica Wan has said in praise of his work, "In The Galleons, Rick Barot brings his understated virtuosity and processual sensitivity to bear on issues of post-colonialism, representation, memory, and grief." Other poets have engaged with these topics, but what is remarkable here is that Barot dares to enter these arenas with a kind of radical defenselessness, having laid aside the armor of authority, attitude, or agenda. Please join me in welcoming Rick Barot.
Hi, everybody. How's that, the sound? Is that good? Thank you so much for the introduction, Josh. And good evening to all of you. I'm so grateful to everyone who has worked to make this gathering possible, especially Chris Molinsky and Teresa Phillips. And a really special thanks to Rose McClarney, who invited me here in the first place. It's really wonderful to be part of something that honors Jake Adam York, a poet whose work I admired quite a bit and continue to admire. And it's also a pleasure to celebrate the work of Daniel Donaghy. I'm so excited to hear you read that wonderful poem, Daniel. I'm going to read a few poems from my recent book, The Galleons, and then also read some newer work. I'm planning to read for about 15 minutes, and then we'll get to Daniel. So the title poem for my book, The Galleons, is comprised of 10 poems, and I'm going to read the first and the last poems in the sequence. And The Galleons is ostensibly an elegy for my grandmother, who died in 2016 at 92 years old. And so the book is more or less an elegy for her, with a lot of other things brought in to contextualize her life. And so in this first poem, called The Galleons One, she's the woman who is referred to in this poem. The Galleons One. Her story is a part of something larger. It is a part of history. No, her story is an illumination of history, a matchstick lit in the black seam of time. Or no, her story is separate from the whole, as distinct as each person is distinct from the stream of people that led to the one and leads past the one. Or her story is surrounded by history, the ambient spaciousness of which she is the momentary foreground. Maybe history is a net through which just about everything passes, and the pieces of her story are particles caught in the net. Or her story is a contradiction, something ordinary that has no part in history at all, if history is about what is included, about what is made important. History is the galleon in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, in the middle of the 16th century, swaying like a drunk who will take 6 months to finally reach his house. She is on another ship, centuries later, on a journey eastward that will take weeks across the same ocean. The war is over, though her husband is still in his officer's uniform, small but confident among the tall white officers. Her hair is marcelled like a movie star's waves, though she has been too sick with the water's motion to know that anyone sees her. Her daughter is 2 years old, the blur of need at the center of each day's incessant rocking. Here is a ship. Here is an ocean. Here is a figure. Her story, a few words in the blue void. So the next poem that I'm going to read is the last poem in the sequence. This is The Galleons 10. And as Josh mentioned, I was born in the Philippines and we immigrated to the US when I was 10 years old. So this poem is about my Filipino heritage and the childhood that I had there. The Galleons 10. I come from the lowlands. My mother's city was built on the river where the mountains fanned out to the sea, and the city thrived there. I come from farmers. I come from childhood's green radio, from the calachuchi tree and its white flowers. I come from prayer. My parents took me to a faith healer once, though no one now recalls the malady or the terms of the cure. I had a fate. It took me across an ocean. It has taken half a life to see what it was I left behind. I come from teachers and soldiers. On the island where my father comes from, the people covered their bodies with tattoos. I come from soot, from ink. I come from people who honed their teeth to sharp points, who buried their dead in coffins shaped like boats for a journey. I come from horizon. I come from water. So those are the two poems that I will read from The Galleons. I'm looking forward to the next book of poems of mine that will be published in 2024. And the poems that I'm about to read now are from that new book. And so in March 2020, I wrote a series of 30 short prose poems about the experience of the pandemic. And I don't know where you are in that experience, but I wish I had my mask on right now, actually. I'm still in that space of being anxious, I think, as many of us are. But, we've been in this for at least a couple of years. And at the very start of it, one of the ways that I dealt with the fear and the anxiety of the pandemic was just to write about it. So I wrote this sequence called During the Pandemic, and this will be part of the book that's coming out in a couple of years. So each poem begins with the phrase during the pandemic. So that's when you will know that a new poem is coming your way. And this is all I'll read for the rest of the reading. During the pandemic, I fixed on each fear. Each fear was its own fastidiousness. My mother and the ocean, not even a touch of it, not even her feet in the tender edge of the surf. My friend and the tunnels he went through with his eyes closed. When we went outside, we wore latex gloves, the colors of Easter. We stood apart in the mandated distance, like the last pieces at the end of a game of chess. During the pandemic, I kept a list of possible symptoms on the refrigerator door. From a distance, it looked like a shopping list, an ersatz normalcy. Fever instead of flour, cough instead of bacon, fatigue instead of milk. With each day, the slippages proliferated. Hospital instead of hospitality, projections instead of protections, virus instead of virtue. Asymptomatic veered towards asymptote, an intimate infinity between them. During the pandemic, I looked out the window at the moment a runner went by. His stride had an exaggerated beauty, like everything that was outside of my mind. The blue recycling dumpster, the white cereal bowl, the pink full moon. Inside my mind was woe, an attic full of gray insulation. During the pandemic, I knew we were in a period of interval, so I considered what an interval meant. The interval we were in was not like swinging in a hammock on a warm afternoon. It was not like making a lesson plan to be taught. It was not even like being inside a car wash and its cleansing tempest. It was more like lucky speech in the middle of Beckett's play, its torrent of rage and grief, after which the waiting, which was the point after all, resumed. I hope these poems aren't giving you PTSD about the early part of the pandemic. Jule, remember when you had to wash your apples? During the pandemic, I wanted to take up as little space as possible. Wake, wash, eat, clean, watch, lie. I wanted my habits reduced to a ritual of monosyllables. The painter said, "A skull is a beautiful structure and used to waiting." I admired the painter's suave severity, that grim style. Now that isolation and obedience were what I knew of refuge. During the pandemic, I thought of scale. Pandemics, I read, had shaped human history from the start, like lava scorching an old landscape with regularity. This was one kind of scale. The tweet from the man announcing his wife's death from the virus, this was another kind of scale. Soft, the size of my face, the mask I wore to the store was one kind of scale. The racist violence being done to people who looked like me, this was another kind of scale. The poem is the speech of citizenship, a scholar wrote, and I laughed. During the pandemic, I went outside as into an abstraction. Every body was a vector. Every public space was a possible inflection point. The very air was a moral injury. But there was no abstracting this. The bus driver died, the shoemaker, the chef, the playwright, the nurses and the doctors, the ambassador, the princess, the leader of the band, the scholar of Derrida. This is the last one. During the pandemic, I praised the cherry blossoms. I praised my lungs. I praised crying. I praised the faces of my students checkerboarded on the computer screen. I praised the curses I gave to those who deserve them. I praised coffee. I praised ventilators. I praised the people gathered on the rooftop of a nearby building, laughing as they looked up at the night sky. Thank you all so much for listening. As I said, I'm very excited to be helping to usher up Daniel Donaghy to read his poem, Tulsa Triptych. And I'm just going to read the citation that I wrote for the poem because I think it sounds really smart, and it's smarter than I usually am, so I'm going to read it. Bringing together documentary amplitude and lyric intimacy, Tulsa Triptych takes a neglected piece of the American story and brings it into the light of the present. The story it tells is full of violence, which only reminds us that our story has always had that violence as a kind of fundament, up through the social and political calamities of recent years, recent months, and even recent days. But more than just recovering a necessary story, Tulsa Triptych is also an instance of canny, formal presentation, shifting from incantatory catalog, focused scene, to bitter ekphrasis. The poem uses as many of the resources of poetry as it can, understandably and movingly so, given all that is at stake in the specific story it tells and the larger American story that it implicates. And so I'm going to invite Imani Poole to come back and do a proper introduction of Daniel.
Hello again, everyone. It is my honor to introduce the 2022 recipient of the Witness Prize. Currently an English professor at Eastern Connecticut University, he's published in many leading literary journals. I'm sure you've heard of the Southern Review or the Prairie Schooner, for example. With 3 poetry collections under his belt, he's garnered a list of accolades, the most recent of which, Somerset, was co-winner of the 2019 Patterson Poetry Prize, and his previous work, Starting with the Trouble, was winner of both the Arkansas Poetry Prize and Patterson Award for Literary Excellence. A talent who rose from the streets of Kensington, Philadelphia. Let's welcome with open ears the man, the myth, the legend, Daniel Donaghy.
Hi, everyone. Amani, thank you for that. Y'all, just this whole experience has been so wonderful. But we behind the scenes did just a quick walkthrough and make sure the mic worked and everybody's volume was good. And that man, the myth, the legend thing. Thank you for keeping that in. That's tough to follow. But thank you. I just want to echo Rick's thanks for all of the people who made this possible and the magazine and allowing tonight. And Rick, I thank you so much for choosing my poem. And I want to say a few words about Jake York, if I can. Jake and I went to Cornell together. His published work. If you don't, you need to study it and live it and let it challenge you if you are writers in the room, and let it guide you forward to the questions that he was chasing that he didn't have time to pursue. It's our duty to pick that up and keep that going, because he was doing absolutely necessary and vital work. But I would like to share something that doesn't come up when Jake York's bio comes up, and that his ability as a barbecue chef was unparalleled. And I think he'd be very upset that is not like in every bio, to the point where, in graduate school, when we'd get together at the end of the semester, kind of blow off steam, and maybe not the winter, but certainly in the summer, and you just get together for a barbecue. And Jake would cook. Yeah, it's one thing you come over to my house, I make you, a hamburger or, some ribs. Jake would cook for the entire English department. People would come, I don't even know if they were in the English department, would show up. And we just have these wonderful get-togethers. As Cornell, as I'm sure Auburn, competitive schools can be tense at times, and they can bring people in moments of with just a lot of stress and a lot of maybe not taking the time to appreciate the great moment we're in the middle of. And he was always a leading light in those terms of there's a great picture. And if you look on my Facebook thread after Jake's passing, and thinking about him again, and Rick, I posted that Rick had chosen the poem, and my friend Dylan Willoughby, who was at Cornell with us, posted a picture of Jake at one of those barbecues, rocking a Braves hat and overalls with just the biggest, most innocent, sweet smile on his face. And when I think about Jake, I think I'm working a hot grill, unfazed, delivering perfectly seasoned and cooked food that was going to please so many people, and not giving into the heat or the challenge of that moment, and that metaphor that carries over. But I could talk a very long time about Jake, but I don't want to keep you here all night, and I have this long poem to read. But a last thing is that we were around a lot of brilliant people in Ithaca together, and everyone we were there with would say they love Jake. I mean, deeply love Jake. And I miss him so much. So I'm going to stop now and just say that I want to read this today. I'm just not good. I'm the, I don't know. You can watch any movie with me. This happens all the time. But I'll stop. But I do want to just say one thing, that the spirit of Jake is very much alive in what you've continued to build, and this honor, this tremendous honor, is just so wonderful. And the energy, it just fits the person that we're honoring here tonight. And that all of the people, I don't want to miss any names, but all of the people who were there with him, not only did we love him, we also know this just may be the smartest person we've ever met. And he didn't use that intelligence against you. He didn't suffer fools wisely, but he was so generous. And you see where his intelligence led him, the questions that he pursued to the nth degree led him to this work that is going to live forever, and it raises the questions that we all need to keep pursuing. In terms of there are stories that are untold, that need to be told, stories that have been forgotten, that need to be remembered. And I want to segue now into this poem. I'm writing this poem, and I was overwhelmed by the subject at first. Started it before the anniversary of last year was the acknowledgement of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, May 31st and June 1st of 1921. It went under apocryphal circumstances. The stories, I try to lay it out in the poem, but I'm going through, I want to remember the story. And I remember Jake posting just a random thing on Facebook one time. And he says, the important thing is that I get it right. That was it. And he was wrestling one of his early books, and man, I heard that. I want to get this right. I need to honor so many things, and I don't want to insult or shortchange anything. And man, I wanted to show Jake the drafts of this poem. So So I want to, I'm not going to tear up again, but Rick, my relationship with, I really appreciate what you said about admire Jake's work, and that's the great thing about writing is that, that great writing doesn't die. And my friendship with Jake has continued, in my heart after he has passed. And this award, I can't tell you how much it means that there's one more chapter added to that friendship. I will be thankful for the rest of my life for that. So thank you. Now here we go. Some notes on the poem I think may come up now and then, but I think pretty much it I hope speaks for itself. It's called Tulsa Triptych. It's 3 parts, 3 sections, 3 separate poems. You could read them individually, but they're meant to be read collectively, thinking about before, during, and after the Tulsa Race Massacre. And as we think about what happened 101 years ago now in Tulsa, we have to remember that was happening all over. In the South, yes, not just in the South. Massacres, not just the murders of famous martyrs such as Emmett Till and Medgar Evers, but beyond that, the obscenity of that viciousness, the erasure of entire communities, and with that comes the erasure of people, of culture, of families, and then economically, it erases the potential for generational wealth to build. So the damage done in those days of racial violence happening with impunity is continued to be felt today, and I try to touch on that in the poem. But so it's called Tulsa Triptych, and we're thinking about Tulsa, but it echoes so many familiar themes of other things. So I wanted to set this up in writing about it, that when we think about what is lost, we are moved by, of course, the scene of fire, the scene of destruction. But we can become not numb, but we can become maybe a bit out of sync with the calamity of that loss when we don't realize what was there in the first place. And when I set out to write this poem, yes, there are very, very dark moments as you can have in this poem. But first, we are going to sing, and we're going to remember what happened in North Tulsa, the miracle that was built there, and that could have been the blueprint for what could have happened all over this country, and we'd be living in an entirely different and a much better, more equitable place. So the first section is called Dreamland. It kind of gives you the scene of how North Tulsa came to be, and all the vitality that was going on there. All right, so Tulsa Triptych, before, during, and after the Tulsa Race Massacre, and this is called, the first section is called Dreamland. O.W. Gurley bought 40 Tulsa acres, named them Greenwood, said they were only to be sold to colored in Greenwood, where he imagined a bigger Boley, Langston, Taft, Redbird, thriving all-black Oklahoma towns before Greenwood, before statehood brought its Jim Crow laws and made the Klan king everywhere. But Greenwood, where Gurley opened a rooming house that sheltered fleeing black migrants. Greenwood, from its start, a promised land. Greenwood, where Gurley met young J.B. Stratford, and the two built empires. Greenwood, only place black Tulsans could shop, where $1 traded hands for years, and built communal wealth. Greenwood, a self-sufficient world, 10,000 people, 40 blocks of black businesses and homes, 20 churches, its own hospital, post office, bank, schools. Greenwood, home to the Stratford, nation's best black hotel, velvet wingback chairs, oak tables and doors, chandeliers, its own pool hall, saloon, dining room. And of course, Greenwood had the Dreamland, Tulsa's Apollo, black vaudeville, theater troops, silent films with live piano, 750 seats, and black people free to walk through the front door and sit in any of them. Greenwood, where a man got a suit, shine, shave, and fade on the same block he shot whiskey and pool. Greenwood, where Remingtons clacked through evening typing classes and maids packed salons to print for their Thursday nights off. Greenwood, fork clink, chatter hum, steam rising off barbecue and chili in any number of cafes. Sunnyside, Cozy Corner, Busy Bee, Little and Bell, Lone Star, Square Deal. Greenwood, dancers and doctors, hustlers and haberdashers. Smitherman stressing vigilance in each edition of the Star. Greenwood, more than the Negro Wall Street, Washington deemed it. Greenwood, Black Main Street, a blueprint for making a way out of no way. A dreamland, real as rain raising the Arkansas River over its banks, real as Klansmen's footprints sucked into the mud there, real as oil spilled from a blown-out well that looks like smoke over the Dreamland Theater on June 1st, 1921, when the wind catches it, the only cloud in a clear sky, real as the Greenwood Avenue you could walk this afternoon, towing snow off tiny markers, where shops and offices once stood, whispering prayers, listening for any sound of all that was Greenwood, and hearing only the steady whoosh of 244, built like the ballpark and the health center to erase the crime scene, the open wound, the sacred ground, the victory of Greenwood. The next section is called Spark. The Tribune referenced here is the Tulsa Tribune, a newspaper sympathetic to the Klan. Spark. The Tribune said Dick Rowland was a delivery boy who paced the Drexel's third floor, looking up and down the hallway as if to see if there was anyone in sight, and not a pool hall shoe shiner in the Drexel's third floor bathroom, the only one open to him, a black man in downtown Tulsa, 1921. So Rowland was a delivery boy looking to rape, the paper said, Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white elevator girl, an orphan paying her way through business college, even though she was 21, not in school, no orphan, even though all Rowland wanted to do, all he was looking to do, was to relieve himself and maybe sip cold water through cupped, cracked hands that ached at the joints, arced stiff at the joints, after hours of polishing, of swirling polish across the tongues of rich white oilmen's shoes. In the slant of cigar-fogged magic city sunlight, hands that shook, most likely after the elevator lurch, and he stepped on Page's shoe and he broke his fall by grabbing her arm and she screamed. The paper said Rowland attacked her, scratching her hands and face, tearing her clothes. So he attacked her. Diamond Dick pushed her against that elevator's wire cage. Poor white orphan girl trapped with a boy whose age was not given, just his race. Though the clerk who ran to help Page said she was not bruised nor her clothes disarranged in any way. Though Page wouldn't file charges, and there's no mention of any scratches or tears in the police report or the interview with Page's neighbor, Anna Green, whom Page told the next day she swung her purse when Rowland fell toward her. That's it. She screamed. He ran. Maybe Page was racist, guard up against a black man. Maybe 2 divorces from white men who struck her made her sick of lurching hands. Either way, Roland ran out of the elevator and the Drexler building, down Main, past Beano Hall. And Beano represents, it sounds like a innocuous little meeting place. Beano is code for Beano Jews, Beano Catholics, Beano N-word. Okay, so he ran out of the elevator and the Drexel building, down Main, past Beano Hall, where the Klan pledged allegiance to fire and hate and its next extravagant parade. And he had to know that scream was the whistle they'd been waiting for. So many thousands strong, it took 5 hours for those parades to float like smoke through downtown Tulsa in formations of crosses or rows of troops prepped for another war. Always through Greenwood, past Roland's family's rooming house on Archer, their numbers saying they will erase this place, purge this scourge from the earth. All they need is a spark for their torches. And from that evening's headlines, it rose. So for three, Charlotte, could you put up the photo? We're going to try a technical move here. We'll see if we can, a last minute complication on my part. Okay, this is a photograph that was taken on June 1st, 1921. And this is a man, it's cataloged as armed man posing for the camera in front of the Dreamland Theater. And you will see in this person who could be 40, he could be 16. I put him somewhere in the middle of this in the poem, but you'll see this is somewhere he is holding not one, but two rifles as he sucks on that cigar and stares at you saying, what are you going to do about it? Behind him is burning the Dreamland Theater, which was a place that, as I mentioned all those things earlier, black musicians came through and plays and all the rest, and silent films with live music. And there were meeting houses and strategy sessions held there. And you see it burning. It's being destroyed as he not only is in the middle of being a central part of it, but stopping to be photographed in this way. And when you're writing about this issue, think about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and you start doing research on it, you learn more about it, you get so furious, you know? And I'm looking as an artist, I'm looking for some place to locate that grief. And I you know, when, like, it's so hard to react to the multiple in our mind, you know, like if I say, imagine an animal, immediately we call up a single kind of animal, a species of animal, right? It's kind of the way our brain catalogs things. So I in thinking about all of the people who poured across Archer Street onto Greenwood Avenue and led to the destruction of Greenwood and all that was built there, I channeled it through this one photo. And this section is called Hate. Someone knows who you are. Armed man posing for the camera in front of the Dreamland Theater, sucking the last of a cigar, feet spread easy over rubble, like you're waiting for a trolley. Stare blank as a child's watching a loose balloon rise over the Arkansas, whose currents swirled that morning over and around the truckloads of black bodies, not hauled out of town or heaped into mass graves. Store owners, barbers, doctors, lawyers, teachers, chefs and shoe shiners, printers and publishers, hustlers and hoteliers sentenced to death for the crime of having more than you, of having built in North Tulsa between Archer and Pine, Cincinnati and Lansing, a world that didn't need white people. Someone knows your name. Terrorist, assassin, dime a dozen thug, who'll slip soon beyond the camera's eye to squint down a scope aimed at a runner the machine gunners missed before you jump into a truck and rumble back like nothing happened to your life, maybe to a wife who'd leave if she could, who heaped your supper onto a plate that night, June 1st, 1921, that you chewed open-mouthed while you spun your own myth to your kids, passing to them, then, as always, the language of hate in which they will become fluent to please you. Because kids need heroes as fathers and need their fathers' gifts to be good. Someone wrote on the back of a photo what you were called, buddy or skip, son, grandpa, father, maybe some saint or martyr, maybe gangster Fred Barker, like the researcher says, although he can't be sure. Someone knows where you're from and if oil or crime or something else brought you to Oklahoma. Facts lost now to the air. Your eyes lost in this photo to shadows in midday sun. Sleeves rolled against heat and in each hand a shotgun as smoke curls around the dreamland. Rises as one long cloud over Greenwood, over Tulsa on an otherwise beautiful day. Someone knows who you are, scrawny man, now dead, emblem of hostility, bronzed in Reconciliation Park. Someone else knows the three men behind you taking in the scene like a sunrise, but they've let themselves forget, let you keep smirking inside the sepia print. Smirk that says, you know you'll get away with everything, and you did. Never charged. Not one white person even tried for shooting, killing, burning down a world and gifting the cash he didn't sell as souvenirs, smoke stink and soot still on them. Watches, brooches, rings, now family heirlooms in white Tulsa for 100 years. Flaunted in photos, hanging crooked in passed down homes. White families squeezed together, looking spiffy in their Sunday best, looking serious as an armed man posing for the camera in front of the Dreamland Theater. The jewels of dead or weeping Black women glimmering with them through generations of light. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much for those readings. Am I audible? Okay. I was warned I was quiet. I have collected some questions from students, and I can't ask them all, but I wanted to ask a couple of representative ones. Starting off with a question about the content of your poems and research. I had some questions that people are interested in your research process. If you compile information before you start drafting a poem, or if the writing process leads you to do research, or if those steps are intertwined. Be interested from hearing from both of you.
This poem was more than maybe others that I've written, obviously heavily based in research, and just going back to just reading as much as you can, and there's been some really good documentaries about the Tulsa Race Massacre, but the great thing we also have are so many extant recordings of survivors, and also as in video archives, and also written survivors' tales. So the key for me is not getting overwhelmed by the research and trying to find the emotional thread that went through it. So this sort of comes from the research, and then the question was, how do you find a way to make this into a poem?
But at what point did you encounter this photograph and decide that it would be a central piece of the poem?
I can't remember exactly, the day, but it was the kind of thing that the first section I wrote was the middle one about Dick Rowland, because that was the story. I want to convey the story. Another story, and this is the trope: the scary Black man did something to the virginal white girl, and that's the trope, and therefore all hell is now allowed to break loose in the name of justice. So I wrote that, and it was that in thinking about what happened as in Roland. What's so strange is Roland was guarded by World War I vets, African American World War I vets who came by and stood outside the jail and said, "You are not going to harm this boy," and that's what really escalated things. So he actually wasn't lynched, which was the plan. So he and Sarah Page both kind of disappear into history in a very strange way, but a mysterious way. But I saw this, early on, and it was just the kind of central image of coming back to. So you wrote, I said, I think I've got at least the heart of the story and how the news organization at the time we used to flame hate. And then at the Greenland section, because I didn't want to just focus on what happens at the end. Then it's coming down to how do we really talk about the loss of generational wealth, the lingering effect that is caused so much damage. And then that photo that I've been, probably one of the first things I saw, it came back to that, and very much sitting there and taping it to a wall and talking to it is sort of, this was the last section I wrote, and it was the one that, how it's like, I guess I'd been writing it the whole time, but I didn't have the shape or the lens. But,
I love too the idea that you had where you said that, you have this overwhelming amount of response to the material and the history you're looking at, but to locate sort of the grief and the outrage in one particular specific person or thing as a way of kind of understanding, your own responses to what you're learning, what you're uncovering. It's really amazing to end up sort of with this image, which is so menacing, and yet, I imagine that, an art historian would look at this and also say that it's got elements of beauty in it as well. And, if you don't necessarily know the story, there's something about the composition maybe that could be read in a kind of aesthetic way. But once you know the context, it becomes this incredibly violent and violating experience looking at that photograph.
Yeah, violent and violating. Yeah, and I have to say, another thing that haunts me about this is I went to Tulsa last February and March as for more pleasant reasons, as our youngest daughter, my wife Karen is in the back, who also knew Jake and loved Jake, and Jake was at our wedding, and there's a wonderful picture of him in her kitchen the night before our wedding. But our youngest daughter was involved in a film project, and because it was COVID, I was teaching on Zoom. I went to Tulsa, and we was going on to Greenwood Avenue, and you step foot on. I knew something, that this was sacred ground, that this was an open wound, but stepping on there, it really felt like an active crime scene, as no one here was ever charged with anything once you understand the story of a total destruction, 40 city blocks, and we think about just how big that is. And then you're looking at the photo, and I remember having a lot of conversations with Jake about this, and certainly with others, but as a white writer, you're entering this moment, and you're trying to speak to it, and you're trying to find a way into it where you're not overstepping, where you're not claiming authority where it does not belong. And I'm looking at this photo, and I remember standing on Greenwood Avenue saying, if I were here that day, my dad would have handed me a gun. And I love my dad, love my father. That line about kids, you're taught the language of hate to please your father. And that's me and my dad. That's as autobiographical as I've ever written. But so I'm looking in there. It's, my dad. He was prone to acts of violence and spoke in nothing but slurs to anyone who was not white. And when it became a kind of betrayal when I used a different language. So in many ways of channeling it becomes personal, isn't it? History is very personal, but right. Somehow there's a complicated relationship going on.
Well, what you've just described, the photograph becomes a kind of mirror.
Yes, yeah, photograph as mirror.
Yeah, and the way you've just described it, your father is brought in, and your own history, your own whiteness gets brought into the reflection that you're doing in this photograph.
Well, yeah, that's what I was just trying to think about, and and point that it's not over. We're not done. It's not, you go there. Has anyone been to Tulsa to Greenwood Avenue? It's a block. It's like from here, like you could kick a ball and it would roll almost to the extent of what is left because they bisected it intentionally. You cut through poor neighborhoods, especially black neighborhoods, and it's going to decrease property value. That's where interstates are running through, devaluing and cutting off the potential for generational wealth and happiness and health in that moment. And you look and you can see the end, you go, okay, this must have been really bad. Look at this little street. You've got to know, you got to go there and understand that this went on from Archer to Pine, way past the Oklahoma State Health Center. This went over Cincinnati, which you can't even see from Greenwood Avenue. It's way, way, way over here, over to Lansing. The devastation of it. And that's where, I wanted to leave it in the middle, that it isn't something that happened 100 years ago, that this is functionally affecting everything now. That was the goal of where we went.
But I'm thinking too that the story that you tell is part of a kind of a series of stories that happen all over the country. I'm currently teaching a class at my university on Asian American experience. And in the town that I live in, Tacoma, in 1895, there was also a race riot where all of there was a pretty sizable Chinese community in Tacoma in the late 1800s. And in 1895, one night, a mob just came in the way they did here and destroyed everything and expelled all of those people. Drove them out of town. And in the 40s, the Tacoma also had a pretty good-sized population of Japanese Americans. And all of those people were removed during Japanese internment during World War II. And so this incredibly vibrant village was destroyed and removed. And those people didn't really come back in the same numbers that they did before World War II. So this story is, as grotesque and as violent as it is, it's just one of a series of other stories that you could all probably come up with, that about from whatever part of the country that you're in. So the story that you tell, I mean, it's so important to tell because it's part of a bigger story.
And we didn't learn about these things in school.
No.
Did anybody learn about either of these massacres in school? You didn't. What about the Tulsa? I'm from Tulsa. You're from Tulsa. Yeah. That's interesting. So what was the attitude?
I went to a liberal arts school, so it was pretty discussed. My friends who went to public school did not.
Yeah, I just saw that in the last year or two, the teachers have the option of introducing it into the curriculum. That's great that your teachers expose you to the truth. That's because there's so many. You think, oh, that bad thing happened. That's a shame, but it was everywhere, and it's these erasures of cultures and communities and histories that I think it's our job to go back and try to tell the story as we can.
And also, just reckoning with shame is so hard, and these stories are challenges to that kind of reckoning. And there are many people who don't necessarily want to engage in that kind of work because it distresses not just themselves, but also their idea of what this country is and who they are in it. So the work of shame is really challenging work, but we haven't started to do any of that work. But I think artists have. I mean, if you've been to the museum right now, there are amazing exhibits in there that are doing the work of that kind of reckoning. So in a way, we can maybe celebrate artists as being at the forefront of that kind of thinking, that kind of reflection, that kind of healing, perhaps even.
And can you tell us a little bit about your research, Rick, perhaps how you intertwine
I have to answer it too.
The galleon, research into the galleons with more personal elements, or you can speak to your research if you prefer. But
So the galleons is comprised of 10 poems, and a couple of them are about my grandmother because she is sort of the spark point for the project, which is to elegize her and her life. But I didn't want to write just a kind of a sappy set of elegies for her. And so I really wondered, how can I give this more density, in addition to the emotional density that I already had in place? And so I started thinking about her as a woman who lived through most of the 20th century, lived up to 92 years old, and the kind of the epic but intimate nature of her life story, and what other kinds of stories could actually be attached to her life. And so she was, she was an immigrant to this country, and so I could think about her story that way in terms of immigration. She was an immigrant from the Philippines, which was a colony of Spain for 300 or so years, and also a colony of the United States. And so all of these sort of large-scale things like history and colonialism and capitalism and immigration, I started to think about and do some research about those parts of her story and trying to make connections between those two senses of scale. One is very small, one is very big. And so my research was just about kind of looking at things that had to do with those bigger scale things. But poets, I imagine that poets do research very differently from, let's say, nonfiction writers or fiction writers, who I imagine have a more systematic way of doing research. And maybe this is not true of you, Daniel, but I, as a researcher, it's like I'm going thrifting. It's like I'm looking at shiny, kind of interesting looking things at the Goodwill, and then I sort of pull those towards me and kind of try to create the emotional story that's attached to that thing and my response to it. And so a lot of the research that I did for the Galleons was, I did a lot of it, but I wasn't systematic in the sense that I was taking notes on everything. I was taking notes on the things that I noticed, which might be very small, very sort of, a little detail that might on its own not have a lot of significance, but it had a lot of sort of poetic aura for me. And so that was the research that I engaged in. It was a kind of, what's in front of me that's shiny? And then I'm going to think about it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to have Chris Malinsky come up for our final remarks of the evening.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Rick. That was a lovely evening. And thank you all for being here. I just wanted to say quickly, if you have more questions, please stick around. The museum will stay open till 8 o'clock. If you'd like publications from either of our poets this evening, they're available in the museum shop, and we'll have the opportunity to have them signed in the cafe. Please be sure to join us again for November 17th. We're having an event then about the smell of risk. It's an evening about smell and olfactory aesthetics, both here and online if you can't make it. So thanks again for being here tonight. Thank you.